I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
Okay, this is episode 43 of Narrative Wake. And you know what? Obviously, just for the sake of this intro, I've become incredibly obsessed with the Hebrew Kabbalah, which was the concept, if you remember, that letters actually equate to numbers, and therefore you can add up the meaning of letters and numbers, and so it has some sort of spiritual significance, a specific number as to what it means in words. So 43, the number, right? It's not actually a very famous number in sports. There's no like great basketball player that everyone remembers had that number. But there was a player in the NFL who was one of my favorite players. In fact, this is one of the first sports jerseys I owned, which was Troy Polamalu of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who was the strong safety, one of the best defensive players of all time, won a Super Bowl. Now, a couple actually. Now, obviously, that thematically fits because a strong defensive player who had to be able to carry the offense. I think if you know the history of Chinese League of Legends, anyone who likes the region is immediately put on the back foot. They are immediately on the defensive. They're having to almost apologize for liking the region. They have to sometimes draw some vague allusions to it's a bit like NA, but with Asian people. They're trying to use all sorts of weird, sophistry, because the big problem is, because people watch LCK because it's the best. It's not even really with the Koreans, it's just it's the best. If they don't watch the best, they're going to watch their home region. And so people have never managed to find a reason to watch Chinese League of Legends, even though, to be fair, I've always thought there was a fairly obvious one. It's the second best. Why would I watch the worst if I had options to watch other best leagues? So for this episode, Kelsey, it's going to be an LPL-themed episode. You're coming out on the offensive, right? No more defending, no more having... listen, RNG won MSI. China is the number one region right now. Yeah. A free King Zone aren't even going to be in the LCK. Fuck Korea. You know what? For all we know, some rookies are going to win that league. How good could it be? A bunch of rookies might win that league. Or KT Rolster, who we all know are never supposed to be allowed to win that league. So, quite frankly, Korea's on the down. That stock's going down. China's is just rising and rising and rising. We're going to discuss in this episode, maybe RNG aren't even the best team. Maybe China is deeper than people knew. All they have to do is go and look at player of the games. Doinby's still up there. None of you recognise him in the Westie. You all still think he's shit. He's still clearly done way more than half of your fans. Anyway, I'll stop attacking the fans at this point in time and introduce the guest for this episode. So the guest for this episode is FrVonLettow, and he is a writer for DotEsports, the Spanish edition, because they actually do apparently have one. You learn something new every day, don't you? So, FrVonLettow, I've got an obvious question for you here, mate. Mm-hmm. Why does someone coming from Spain, writing about League of Legends, choose to write about and focus on the LPL? What interested you about the LPL?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, because it starts with IPL 5, the first tournament that I saw in general, because I remember IOM Kiev also, and then it was the Worlds, and then it was IPL 5. I really was impressed for Team WD, but I didn't actually get attracted to the LPL in that moment. In the moment that I really got attracted was in 2015, because I started to see this different kind of styles that we didn't have in Europe at the time. I remember the Juggernaut from Crystal, for example, or teams like Snake or Xiao actually going up so fast. And at that moment, I had a bet with a Spanish newspaper that doesn't it exists nowadays. It doesn't exist nowadays. That is called Flash. And I said to them, okay, I love this region, and I think we should cover all regions, even if we are in Spanish. So I will go to this region because I know it's the hardest, because it has the most matches, and I know it has the most exciting matches in terms of what is entertaining for me. So I got interested into it. I actually watched all the games in that season, and then I just went to Worlds, and people hate me in that moment. So that's it. That's the history of my life, in a sense.
They hate you? Why?
Yeah, because, I hyped so much LGD. Right. I hyped so much AG. I remember hyping the duo of Kakao and Rookie so much, and then they got crushed. I even said, I don't remember who the jungle. Yeah, it was Rainover, and I said Kakao is going to crash Rainover, and then it went the other way. So people blame me so much for that, and then they just didn't believe me.
Okay, right. Let's start here then. So Let's actually start with what I jokingly alluded to at the beginning of the episode, Kelsey. So, using the logic, by the way, that every single fan of Korean League of Legends has used for the last few years, which is if Korea wins the international tournament, they must be the best, then logically, Chinese League of Legends must be the best at the moment on aggregate. Would you agree? Do you think the region is the strongest of them all if you had to pick one?
It's really interesting because I feel like this split of Korea has really turned over a bunch of things and a bunch of assumptions, and obviously the change in meta, I think, put a lot of stuff into flux. I don't think you can say that LPL is the strongest overall until they have the track record. I put a lot of stock in historical performances and the fact that Korea has continuously produced championship teams, and not just championship teams, but teams that will perform better in the second place spot from LCK than teams in the second place spot from other regions, I think is something that you cannot overlook just because RNG won MSI. However, I do think that a lot of the narrative of why RNG won MSI and a lot of the narrative of what has made LPL good is a bit outdated in the West overall. And so I think that we can't overlook the fact that these guys have made significant improvements, not just infrastructurally and not just like mechanically, but in how they're playing at the map and how they're playing at the game. And then so they're able to go toe to toe and match Korean teams, not just in individual skill, but in that aspect of the game as well. So,
okay, what would you say, FrVonLettow? Is China the best, or is Korea?
Like, I actually think that Korea is actually the best right now in terms of global teams, like every single team if you compare team to team. But I feel like there are some like aspects or some points, like for example, wave management and also lane assignments, that I think that the Chinese teams, even the lower teams, improved a lot. And these type of topics haven't been really recently. If they continue that track, I think that they could overcome. But right now, like for example, I see many teams doing good wave management, like setting an slow push, but then they don't execute it without a slow push. Like they know the basic, they know that what they have to do, they execute it, but then they forget that they do it that well. So that doesn't happen with Korean teams, and that's the gap that I see in terms of macro in a sense. But I actually feel like if they continue that track, they could get better. Yeah, in a certain point in the time. Yeah.
What do you think on that then, Kelsey? Let's open that topic up then as a more general topic. You can obviously reference teams if they're good examples of it before we go individually on some of the teams. What are the differences then between China and Korea, or where has China improved? Where, I mean, for example, you know, in the past, sadly, I feel like people are still warped by two types of vision of Chinese League of Legends. There's either WE, where they think, right, all they do is play around the AD carry, which is about 4 years out of date at this point in time. And then there's the other vision, which unfortunately will probably never leave people's minds because OMG was such an exciting team. They think, right, all they do is just dive past all the towers and they have super aggro players. Again, doesn't really fit, for example, like EDG that's been to all those last few worlds. So where is Chinese League of Legends at the moment? And then contrast it to Korea, because I think you alluded to some factors there, but you didn't go into them. So where would you start, Kelsey?
So where I would start is just highlighting the narrative around like why RNG won MSI, which is, I think, very focused on, UZI is the best player in the world and at that time, and he's 1v5ing everyone, and he's just like getting insane CS leads because he's that much better in lane. But the CS leads that this guy gets at 20-30 minutes are not possible unless you are setting up the waves very intelligently so that he can get these types of CS advantages. And there were crucial mistakes that Kingzone made in the final, for example, where they like 4-man or 5-man on the top side. And during that time, UZI can push out like bot wave and then transition mid and push out the mid wave while Xiaohu is TPing top and defending. And then so he'll get like his CS lead of maybe 10 CS will transform into a CS lead of 30 CS in that time. And so just like his optimization, his efficiency in moving lane to lane is really overlooked. And at the same time, they're using that sort of transition to pressure 2 lanes while Kingzone is only pressuring 1. And that's just better macro game play. Like that's just better. It's not about an individual skill at that point. It's just better playing of the map, better understanding of the game. And it's not like, oh my God, all they can do is team fight because you're a little bit missing what RNG did well at MSI, if that was your conclusion watching that series.
Okay. What do you think, FrVonLettow? I mean, you alluded to it before, wave manipulation. What do you think of this aspect?
Like, only with RNG, because I refer to all teams, I think that people underestimate a lot LetMe. And when I was seeing like these season matches of Citai and LetMe, I saw that teams tried to punish when they were playing against Citai a lot the top lane, and some teams failed to punish RNG when they focused on the top lane, because LetMe absorbs the pressure a lot. And then that's what Kelsey said. Xiaohu has enough priority, and then they have enough priority in bot lane. So Karsa was playing a lot, focused in bot lane. Even the last week, like ninth week, it was so awkward because they were having this kind of compositions to protect the ADC. Who never, I don't think there's any team in the world that plays that right now. So I think that in terms of wave management, I don't think that RNG is an example of what I said exactly, but I feel that having that player there, LetMe, who can absorb pressures, make them really easy to like translate that to having like a fast push in bot lane and invading the jungler. And I think that IG was doing the same lately. Like I see Ning playing Zac, for example, doing the same with Rookie, and I think that's like an improvement. Like if I say it that way, IG has a better way to play that kind of style because Rookie is having better priority over Xiaohu, but it's like RNG guided them to do that because of winning them. So I actually feel like wave management is not the core issue for those two teams, but the way that both teams play around top lane makes it that LetMe absorb pressure, and IG needs that pressure sometimes. And Duke also steps a lot, like Duke played way better. So I don't think that the things that I said about some teams knowing what to do, how to slow push, but don't execute it, affects RNG and IG actually. I think it affects, for example, Jingdong, Bilibili Gaming, and also Edward Gaming, for example.
Okay.
Jingdong is a fun team.
Yeah.
They're like the most, if you just want to have a good time, just watch a Jingdong game, basically. So yeah.
Okay, so as actually was the case last split in the LPL, the team everyone hyped wasn't RNG, it was IG, it was Invictus Gaming, because not only did they have the player considered the best, it is Rookie, obviously everyone in the West does know him, everyone does hype him, but also they had this insane record, which basically they've replicated this season. I mean, they also have won the majority of their games. Interestingly enough, a difference is they're also messing around with the top lane still, where like Duke's played most of the split, but now I notice they've started to bring the Shy in again. Now, for people who don't know, the reason why IG wasn't at MSI, and if you remember, as the seasons went on in the split before, everyone was sort of like, right, but how would IG do against the King's Own Dragon X? You know, everyone was waiting for that matchup, and it obviously never happened because of RNG coming along, and then there was the whole thing of like which top laner would end up playing for IG, and that ended up being like a key turning point. So Kelsey, has this split been different from the IG of last split? Like, is there the same concerns that they will lose out in the playoffs? Are they the dominant team? What's your take on this split?
So I'm probably the biggest IG naysayer, just because I've had so many times where I kind of like had some faith in the IG to perform, and then they have kind of been, I won't say exposed because that's kind of a joke. It's like, exposed, woo. But they're a team that usually you can figure out like how they're winning games and also see ways around it in a sort of transparent way. And so I actually thought Duke was good for them, because I think the way that Duke has traditionally approached like pushing side and moving and grouping with the team in the mid to late game has been really, really strong. Whereas the Shy had some issues with the way that IG played out their games. I feel like that has changed to an extent of this split. And by that, I mean like when IG are becoming kind of like RNG, to the extent where they are taking advantage of the fact that the enemy team is building up waves and slow pushing them toward them, and then IG can just catch those waves. RNG used to play this way as well. So if IG needs to group, they will just allow the waves to slow push to them and then just have like really, really good response to that. So they'll push out the waves and they'll grab them, and then they'll move in that sense, and then they'll get a lot of use out of the Varus pick. So the other question mark about IG, other than just like how they were playing this out instead of just like really, really gunning for this hard 1-3-1 that falls apart when they don't have perfect balance is Jackie Love, right? Jackie Love is a really strong player and a really strong rookie player, but so many times when you get to high pressure matches, whether in playoffs, whether against like difficult opponents, he has kind of fallen apart. And I feel like a lot of IG's success recently, for example, their series against Jingdong today, which is the second place team in their group, relied a lot on Jackie Love's performance and getting Jackie Love into a position where he can play something like Varus that catches the enemy team out when they have a lead and just like mows them down, and good, strong positioning in team fights, things of that nature. But I feel like they're playing more and more to bot lane last split as well as playoffs approached. And then when it came to playoffs, Jackie Love fell apart. Jackie Love did not do well, not just in lane, but he didn't do well in those teamfight situations that IG were relying on him to perform in, and that was a really big problem. I wouldn't say that's what cost them the series overall, but it was a huge factor that I think could still be a problem this summer as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have like a different take on IG. Like I understand his points and her points, and I absolutely agree with them. But I think like there's another point on that. Like I will take. I was an analyst of Laskins, a South American team, and at that point, I was like showing all the time Draven's Jackie Love, Draven's Jackie Love, and also the Kog'Maw playing in solo queue. And I saw that player that he was really skilled, but at the same time he made bad positioning in key moments of the game. And I don't think that is only in pressure games. I also saw that in like normal regular season games. But what interested me is that this IG remembers me a lot to the Season 5 SK Gaming before that Iron Katowice, in a sense that they draft priority lanes all the time, like push a lot. And the only teams that I saw them winning against them or trying to like having an advantage, for example, Jingdong today had 2 early advantages, even though they lost the game. I will talk about that later. But it was because they punished a lot the fact that they were pushing all the time. Like the Shy has this mistake that he pushes and the enemy jungler guns him, and it's really easy to take a kill, and it happens a lot. Like I have seen that with Yuk also, and I don't think that it's only Jackie Love, but I feel that when you can catch them in the late mid game, it's because of Jackie Love, but when you can't catch them and like have a pickup in the early game, it's because of the Shy or because of Ning. What about Ning? Like I am so interested about Ning because Ning always invades with priority, but sometimes forgets about globals. Like I feel like Ning is really good with Shaq, for example. I've seen like focusing a lot on Syndra and Ryze in the mid lane because they can, you can flash W instantly and you win the 2v2 in the invade. But at the same time, I feel like they make mistakes because they don't focus at the bot lane. And you see, Jackie Love and Baolan are pushing, but the other bot lane is coming to the jungler faster than them. And that happened a lot of times. And then also what they done today was interesting to me because they selected Lee Sin for Clit. And Lee Sin was focusing on counter-ganking all the time Ning, and that worked too in the early game. But I feel that IG has another strong point that I don't know how to answer exactly. And that's how fast they skirmish in mid-game. Like, they do so fast skirmishes, they pick someone up, and they just won the game because they took Baron after that. Like, they have done that against Rogue Warriors I think it was week 8, and they have done that today 3 times. So I don't know if, you can get an advantage in early game punishing those mistakes, but after that, they always win some fights that they should have not won because they were behind, and they just come back. So I feel that only strong team fighting teams, like for example Rogue Warriors, that they won 1 game, can take games when they are ahead in early. But for example, Jingdong showed today that they can't. So that's interesting for me, yeah.
So I think you pointed out a bunch of the things that I was thinking about but didn't mention, which is I think one underrated thing about IG that people don't talk about is their defensive warding. It's almost like their vision is very interesting to me because even when they're pushing super hard, like they are the red side team, right? They're almost every major region had an enormous blue side win rate this split. But because IG were so dominant, like partly because IG were so dominant and IG prefer red side very strongly, like LPL was the only region where red side had a higher win rate. at the major regions, for example, just because of the top team preference setup. And so they will like play super fast pushing lanes, like as you pointed out, which exposes them to ganks. And part of that is like their vision patterns and their vision setups, which are very strong defensively, but not very strong offensively. So that like makes their comebacks and their like collapses in their own jungle extremely well executed when they need to come back. But early on, like they're very exposed in that sense. So I think that's an underrated aspect of IG. Another thing about Ning is I feel like Ning is used to having multiple priority lanes because they are such a strong red side team. So I wouldn't say he always makes the best decisions in terms of jungle pathing because he can get away with so many different things. And so when you're in a position like where IG played RNG last summer in the playoffs, I mentioned the side lane, I mentioned like Jackie Love, and I said that those were not the main reasons that IG lost, because the main reasons IG lost that series was because RNG's mid jungle just outdid them so hard. Like the synergy between Ning and Rookie, I feel like gets praised a lot, but I don't actually think it's there. And I still think that that's a problem with this team because Ning isn't necessarily making the correct decisions. He's just able to get away with so much because all of his lanes will be pushing in most cases.
Yeah, and also please ban Varus and Lucian against Jackie Love. Ban those. Like I don't feel they can push bot, and if they can push bot, they will have issues trying to invade.
Okay. What about Rookie then? Because obviously he's actually a rare example of where I joked before, like no one in the West to this day really seems to appreciate that Doinby's actually been a very good player in the LPL. It's the opposite with Rookie, which is because they know him from Korea and they've heard the hype when he was in China initially, and obviously that Season 5 run where admittedly it didn't happen at Worlds, but everyone knew he was a very good player and he was obviously hard carrying early on. I noticed that rep has just stuck with him to this day. So to this day, I think some people think that IG is just hard carried by Rookie all the time, and which, as far as I know, hasn't been the case for like 3 years now or something like that. Whereabouts is Rookie now, Kelsey? Is it? I mean, we on past episodes, I know you discussed that you actually didn't even think he was better than Xiaohu earlier this year, late last year. So whereabouts is he, like in the context of his team and then the league?
I still think Rookie is a very, very strong individual player. And I understand where the idea that he is solo carrying his team comes from, because I do think that there are a lot of games where that is the case. You know, there are a lot of games where, you know, IG should be winning this. But I do think that they have worked much more on becoming a team. There were like a lot of issues that I think Rookie had just with he would freeze the wave in mid lane, which would open up people to make plays on his side lanes. And just like not knowing when this would be the best setup, because Rookie relied so much so often when IG didn't have the best players around him about keeping the wave frozen in mid lane so that the jungle would always have an opportunity to gank for him and he could snowball that way. Whereas when it changed so that his side lanes were pushing and winning all the time, when he would freeze mid, like the only option his enemy mid laner would have would be to roam. Effectively in a lot of scenarios, and that's how they would snowball off of side lanes like this. So I think that has changed a lot, but I still feel like Ning and Rookie are strong individual players, but they're still not the kind of duo that I want to see. I want to see them playing off each other much better, and that's something that, even though RNG don't look so hot lately, I still think that when like Xiaohu and their jungler are doing well, they play together better. They play off of each other much more.
Yeah. Okay. About Rookie, I did 4 articles in Spanish about Rookie in the last years. Like I'm tired of talking about Rookie, but I actually feel that Rookie changed a lot in 2016. That he had a bit of a slump in that year, especially in the summer, if I am not wrong. And at the same time, he showed that he come back stronger from that position. So I feel like Rookie right now is a kind of player that I understand people praising them. Obviously, the Americans praise them because if you look at the statistics, he's winning and everything. But at the same time, I feel like what makes Rookie so strong right now is that the shift of the meta from this crazy 8-11 patch to what we have right now is mid-priority focus. I remember Team Vitality, Yamato Cannon say that a lot. Like right now we are focusing a lot on mid-priority, and that fits perfectly Rookie because you take his Orianna, his Ryze, his Syndra, and he tries to push the wave, and I have seen a lot of times that he roams top, he takes the pressure on top lane, but at the same time, because they are pushing in every single lane, every kind of like answer from the enemy team will go wrong. So I feel like I understand that point that Kelsey made about Ning and Rui having not enough good synergy, but I see they overcome that with having a global synergy in a sense, like, okay, maybe I don't have the same synergy with the jungler, but I'm coordinating myself, like I'm going with my top to have these dives if I need to, and sometimes they don't need to, and they don't do that. So I feel like Rookie's not only a really mechanical, like a skilled player, but he's also one of the smartest players in the LPL in general, in every position. And I feel like the problem with Dormy, for example, is that he's really smart, but he doesn't like he plays too much for the team in a sense, and that's why he lost against Rookie in the series when they played in week 8. So I feel like Rookie is a player that gets a lot of focus because of the way he plays, but in another kind of place, like in another kind of style, he could be worse than other players. Like for example, if my mid prio was not so important, but killing the enemy laner in that moment, like having a clash moment was more important, I think Caps actually has a point there. But when mid prio is so important, I think those kind of champions that Rookie is playing lately, they are so good, like Orianna, Ryze, Syndra, and even Lulu. Like Lulu is a really interesting pick in LPL.
Okay. Do you actually think, FrVonLettow, that IG will do it this split? Will they win the LPL?
Like, that's the question I don't want to answer, but I would. I am going to, because like I have been a fan for IG since the times of Rookie and Kakao in a sense. I have never been a fan of them exactly, so I have passion in the sense. But my mind says to me, okay, they are facing Royal probably in semis, how the standings are right now, because they are facing first Royal is facing Edward Gaming, and Royal historically has been a team that is so good about learning about enemy teams. Like in the past, most of their wins in clutch moments were not from their styles, but from countering enemy styles. And Invictus Gaming style is not so difficult to find. Like you can easily point their good points and their bad points. So I feel that, and I also think that even though RNG is slumping, I think that's because they are not finding them together the pieces correctly. Like for example, I've seen this, the comp I previously said about protect the ADC, that for me doesn't make any sense in this meta. And I don't think that will happen in playoffs. So I will think that, I will say IG is going to win, but actually I think it's really, really close.
Okay, what do you think, Kelsey?
I don't think IG will win. I called them last split to win because of the Duke substitution, actually. I didn't think they would win with the Shy, just because I feel like they are still like at their core a one-dimensional team. Like I think they've made a lot of improvements, and a lot of the things about them are way more interesting to watch this split than last split. But at the same time, I just feel like they're going against teams that will have time to kind of like look at their VODs, and even if they're building momentum in the playoff format, which is a little bit awkward. Like I do not like the LPL playoff format. It's kind of like going on an insane like bender for a weekend, right? Where you're going to a different bar and getting wasted and every single time, and it's just like it gets more and more and it weighs on you. But at the same time, you're building momentum. You kind of forget who you are or where you're from, and you just kind of go with it, and it becomes just like we're rolling out of bed. We're going to the next bar today. So I think that actually can aid them if they're starting from the beginning, and it helped them last time. And they're a team that, like he said, I think in LPL you see a lot more organizational identities than you see in a lot of other regions, where teams don't necessarily change just because the roster changed. For example, RNG is, as he said, a team that has traditionally gotten success off of countering enemy team styles. And this goes all the way back to like 2013, when they were the bane of OMG's existence because they figured out a good way to counter OMG, and they effectively debuted it in the regional qualifier. Mm-hmm. And then after that, OMG didn't want to scrim them at Worlds. So like these types of setups, I think, are things that RNG has traditionally displayed throughout the playoffs, and then they have times to review IG's VOD, and maybe IG can kind of like come back from that a little bit, because they'll have time where RNG is playing and they can study RNG's VODs and change up their style. But I don't think IG have shown enough difference in how they play, even from last split, to overcome that. And I also think like Karsa is a player who, even when his laners aren't doing well, is finding a bunch of ingenuity where he kind of goes around the enemy jungler. He's like, okay, I'm going to put a ward here, and it might be a risky invade to get this ward, but then based on having that information, I'm going to work around to get objectives on the opposite side of the map from where the jungler is, even if my team is playing like a super scaling comp. I do think RNG have a lot of issues, but their mid-jungle synergy is strong, and if Jackie Love has issues on stage and lane, then I believe RNG is the worst team for them to face in that sense, because a lot of RNG's problems come from if they're losing their side lanes, like they don't swap, they don't make adjustments. If bot lane is losing, they do not adjust their overall game plan if their bot lane is losing, and I don't think that will happen to them versus IG. So
yeah, and another interesting thing about that I find so amusing is that in those weeks, like that UC entered in the LPL again, and he was trying to find his own form in a sense. I saw Karsa camping a lot, and I see this Trundle gank all the time in level 2 in bot, and I saw that Karsa doing and other junglers. But what was really interesting, Bitsy Gaming had a really Clown Fiesta series against Royal, and in that Clown Fiesta series, even Bitsy Gaming played a style that I don't think IG is able to do. Actually, like the bottom tier, the worst team in the league, I don't think pulled something that I don't think IG can pull, and that's the counter-ganking bot lane, like massive counter-ganking bot lane. Because maybe they changed their style, and as I said, they are really good at adapting in playoffs. But if they have these habits in a sense of like, okay, I have to protect him, you see, at least a bit in the early game. If the enemy team, for example, Rogue Warriors, I think they can pull that, counter-ganks bot lane and tries to, as Kelsey said, like having cross-map plays, they can win, because in a sense, if they pull, like if UC is behind, UC is behind, and at the same time, the bot lane is ahead, like SMLC, I think they can win fights, because I see a lot of mistakes in like micro mistakes in fights for RNG. I see Xiaohu trying to like flank that with Asir, for example. I have seen Let Me using Ornn too fast against Braum or something like that. I don't think it. I don't remember exactly much, but I saw that really in the late weeks. So I feel like if they come with this form, they can make those mistakes. But still, okay, they have some weeks and they can prepare for that. But that's something you cannot point it out, because that exists. And counter-ganking in LPL is not that common. I was surprised about Cliff today, because Cliff did that really well. But I think that and a special team like Rogue Warriors or even Jingdong prepares for that exactly playstyle, and they forget what they do usually, they can cheese 2 or 3 games even.
Okay, so obviously one of the reasons why, as an outsider, you can't just look at the standings, and this is obviously something which has been the case for a while, is that RNG doesn't just play the same 5 players in every game, and famously they let Uzi just have part of the split off. So they did that again, and he just missed out most of the middle of the split. I noticed they did manage to play him both times against IG, so obviously that's like a potential matchup going into the playoffs, but they have also rotated most other players in the lineup as well. They've also been willing to experiment elsewhere. So Kelsey, is RNG's record as a result, like essentially, is it fraudulent? It's not really representing who they are as a team? Or are they just chilling and then in the playoffs they would have powered up anyway? What do you think?
I think that it doesn't necessarily come from the fact that UCI was benched, because I think that they actually did fairly well when UCI was on the bench, mostly in the games where they played Able, not necessarily in the games where they decided to be Fnatic and have Zatai play bot lane or wherever lane. Like, this was, I think, the thing that allowed RNG to do actually really, really well when the meta was so crazy, is because they were super comfortable sending their players on champions that they were good at playing, two other lanes, right? So you could have UZI on Vayne in the top lane against tanks, and other teams weren't necessarily prepared for that because maybe you have a top laner who can play Vayne, but he's not going to be as good as Vayne is as UZI is, right? And so if UZI knows how to play top lane and also play Vayne, then that's fine. And I like legitimately this thing sounds so simple, but just understanding top lane and the flow of the lane and like the fact that it's the longest lane and you're by yourself and that it's often the easiest lane for the jungler to gank actually changes the dynamic. And just using TP and all these other aspects of the lane is sometimes more difficult to grasp, I think, than a new champion. So that's probably why we saw a lot of teams not doing this, but RNG could do it, right? They could figure it out. They could send Xiaohu to the bot lane and deal with the support. They could do all sorts of this stuff, and I think that actually gave them a boost when you typically wouldn't think that would necessarily be something a meta where they would thrive in, where most people were saying, okay, ADCs aren't as good, but that meta gave them a huge boost. And then after that, I think they were able to succeed doing similar things with Abel. But it's actually interesting because when the meta seemed to swing to longer games, when you see more ADCs bot, I feel like they struggled a bit more. And that doesn't necessarily seem so obvious, but they're not. But the last time they played with ADCs bot, like very strictly ADCs bot, and not like people hopping to different lanes and all this stuff, it was much more of a mid to late game team fight centric type ADC style, as opposed to ADCs using engage. And this is a style that RNG, I think, used to be really good at. I think they used to be a very strong 1-3-1 team, and some of their best games at MSI were 1-3-1 games, but they're not showcasing that. And I'm not 100% sure why, but it is worrisome. It's just that you think, okay, what do I know about this team? What do I know about these players? And when have I seen them perform poorly regular season? Last split, they lost to basically the last place team in their group, like a week before playoffs. So I know that this can happen with this team, but I also know what they're capable of. So in that sense, I still place a lot of stock in them and think that they can perform really, really well in playoffs.
Like, it's so interesting to me that you say I don't know the exact word you say, but it was like an euphemism of they didn't like play a bit worse than ever. Like they played really, really, really bad in those matches, like against Litchi Gaming, for example. So I feel like you can always say the same word that people hate in China, like in the LPL of sandbagging. You can say that, but that's not actually accurate. I think that they actually have fundamental mistakes.
I agree.
And those fundamental mistakes are something that we want to forget, and we want to think, okay, they are not going to do that in playoffs, but they are still there. Like these old habits, you never forget them. You know they are there, so you cannot forget that. And at the same time, you imagine, like, I don't know if the TLPL teams could do that because the style is different from other regions. But if a team can provoke those mistakes, like make situations in the game that enhances those mistakes, they are actually a team that is fragile in a sense. Like, for example, I've seen so many times that Karsa has a pathing that is focused so much on bot, as I said previously, that they forget how to skirmish. Like they think, okay, no one is going to contest that. And they have this habit, and I don't know if it's a lack of concentration or it's a thing that they actually don't know how to properly execute. But at the same time, I know that mistake is there. So I don't want to forget that. Like I want to think, okay, if I were an European team or a Korean team, I would actually look for that, because it's in the early game where, in theory, Chinese teams will shine more. So I don't know. I feel like Royal Never Give Up is actually going to be better in playoffs than they have been in the late weeks. But at the same time, I feel like if enemy teams come, like I am looking exactly at Rogue Warriors, because I think they are a team that can properly do that. They can punish those mistakes. I think they are beatable. Like there is no like team in China that right now is unbeatable. Absolutely.
Okay. Right. Being as this team has subs for every position except mid and support. Now, admittedly, AD carry, okay, that might be the thing where they just give Uzi time off. Fair enough. That one you can ignore. But for top and jungle, ignoring when, as you alluded to earlier, in the different meta, they let Z-Tide play bot lane, will we actually see in the playoffs, is this actually part of the core strategy that they will rotate top laners, and will they actually rotate the junglers as we saw in the past still?
I think they have a more defined... I still think they have a more defined difference in style when they play different top laners than when they play different junglers. I think that she has a defined different style, but it's almost like Karsa has sort of... He's found a way to play on this team, but it still just doesn't feel like Karsa. Like peak Karsa was the gambler in the LMS, right? He was the guy who was just like, why are you going level 2 here when this guy could invade your top side and take all of your camps and set you super far behind and your gank won't necessarily work? He's like, no, I like to gamble, you know? I like the 50-50. Like, that was his answer, and I feel like we don't see this in Karsa. That's much more what we think of when we think of MLXG. We're seeing like a type of Karsa who's playing the Sejuani, who's playing to avoid the enemy jungler at all costs and try to find ways to set him behind. So I think there is still like a difference in how the jungle is played and how the game is played, but it's very tentative and it's very weird because I feel like Karsa would almost rather invade. And right now they have a mid who's struggling. They have a bot who's playing like safer lanes. They have a top who's playing safer lanes. So you have like very strange, weird drafts coming out of RNG. You have very strange, weird early games. I've never thought their early game was good this year. In particular, I've never considered their early game particularly strong. So it's interesting to see that type of development from RNG. However, and this is like, and then when they have Zatai versus Lemmy, which is also part of your question, they have Zatai who will play like a much stricter side lane push, whereas Lemmy will absorb way more pressure in the lane. Lemmy will play much more to push to river and then group with the team and team fight. So this is the very defined difference in how they'll set up this way. I absolutely, to talk about the earlier point, I do agree that you shouldn't ignore RNG's flaws. But I just think that all the teams in LPL have flaws, and we're seeing RNG's much more, and they're the same flaws that have always been, but those other teams also have the same flaws. It's almost like no one has changed, you know?
You know, one thing I actually love about the approach that is now the modern approach in Korea and China is that even the approach of the best teams goes against that bullshit narrative Westerners always gave of like the best team just adapts to whatever the new meta is. It's like both the top Chinese and Korean teams have literally built squads that are like, if I want to play style A, this guy plays. If I want to play style B, another player plays. Even though sometimes we're talking about like the best player in the world at that position, almost, you know, I mean, not with the mids, obviously, but the amount of like just swapping where they're almost acknowledging like a player cannot just fundamentally do like a 180 style change for game 2 if I need him to. I just find that kind of curious because it took, obviously, I mean, this is the joke in the West at the moment, like, I'm glad Riot's going to finally give us more subs. It's like, yeah, that could needed to be the case years ago. That's not a new thing. We didn't just invent that, you know, like, wasn't discovered this year. What do you think, Lettow?
I would let me and Sitai, like, I'm going to be drastically strong here because, yes, there are two styles. One is good and one is bad, in my opinion. Let me is really, really, really a needed player for RNG. Like, I don't think there's any top in the league that could fit the let me spot, because the way let me plays is okay. I have no priority at all for my jungle. My jungle is going to focus on, okay, I will to protect the bottom lane in early, and I will try to go with Xiaohu in a sense sometimes. But let me still there, and let me never loses lane when he is in a position where the enemy jungler is camping. I have seen let me winning 1-by-1s without priority and with the enemy jungler around. Like, I actually feel that Ledmi is the best tank player in the world right now. And the way that he plays is not because he's a tank player in a sense, but he actually outputs more damage than Sitai. when he's playing more, like both are playing a lot of Ornn and Cho'Gath, okay? But I see Sitai playing this Gunplank, playing the Aatrox, and I see Let Me playing, okay, some Nard sometimes, but I feel that the way he plays the lane makes it that in the moment that the enemy jungler wants to punish it, that I think it's a mistake because I don't think you want to camp against Let Me, you will see that Let Me is actually winning the game, the lane, before the enemy jungler is coming. So that could only happen with Let Me, and I feel like when Sitai is playing, okay, you have the same position in the sense in global map, but you actually can come top lane, because you can come Sitai, put him behind, and Sitai is not going to come back. That happened to Sitai when he was mid, when he changed to top, when he was mid again, when he changed to top. Like when Sitai is camped, okay, he can be useful with the ultimate of Ornn, but he doesn't output the same damage that Let Me outputs in team fights. So I actually feel that about Cars and MRG, I actually agree with absolutely with what Kelsey said. But about Let Me and Sitai, I feel like Sitai doesn't belong to this team, and that Let Me belongs so much that RNG will be absolutely different. I am thinking about another top laner around outside of China, but I don't find any. I'll maybe be Chichachi, because he's also playing for Schalke. A lot of like this Poppy. It's also weird that Poppy was only played by Oh My God, if I remember correctly, or maybe another team, but not so much in the LPL. But I think that this Itachi is obviously worse than Let Me. So it's so hard to find like a replacement for Let Me that makes him so useful in Royal Never Give Up. And Sitai, he's not bad. He has never been a bad player, but in this team, he's not as useful as Let Me. And that's why I think that the correct style for Royal Never Give Up should bring Let Me all the time.
See, I think that Zitai represents an element of the game that they're bad at and should be good at. I think that if they learned how to play more to topside and learned how to sack bot to play more for topside, then they would be a team that goes to an international tournament and no one can contest, right? They would be that team. Yeah. They would be that team that people want to think that they are. And they're not there. And the fact that they cannot incorporate Zitai's style as well as Let Me's is very indicative of that. But it's funny because a lot of Chinese fans actually don't think Let Me is good. And so they have a joke about Let Me, which is that he basically makes every top laner as bad as he is. So
I mean, it worked against Thule and Khan, so I guess in theory it's working, right? So what you're saying is he's a fucking anti-carry. There we go.
There you go. We're bringing it back. The full Keen meme is coming back, but it's funny because it's like a lot of Chinese fans don't want to talk about like the benefits of the type of player Let Me is. And so they will just say, oh, he's bad. But luckily he makes everyone else bad as well. So
I only remember one player in the league that actually killed one by one with Let Me in a fair position. I think that was Sum from Jingdong. I remember one kill from Sum in lane. But outside of that, I think Let Me is so solid that, I don't know, I know that people blame him a lot, but that's because here in Spain, we have the same problem with a player that is called Morio, that because he plays all the times, because it fits with the team, they will always blame him. Okay, he's not mechanical split, we know that, but at the same time, he's fit in a position, and without him, that position will make the team worse. And I actually agree absolutely with what Kelsey said about Sitai converting the team, but those kind of investments, it's so hard to make in a team, especially in this moment of the year, because it's changing the style and the dynamics. And if I were a team, I would never do that. In this moment, only when you're changing from spring to summer or something like that. But before playoffs, I will not try to do that.
See, this is how I felt about the MLXG the MLXG, Karsa dynamic before playoffs and before MSI with RNG, is that I felt like you aren't going to mess with the jungle dynamic this split. It's not going to carry you to MSI, but then they pulled it out. So I do have a lot of faith in this team to develop stuff. Maybe not that much faith, because I actually felt like the Let Me Zitai dynamic was more well-defined and worked better for them in spring than it has in summer. Yep. So it's, again, it's really a question of what type of RNG are we getting? And you have to kind of expect the worst, but at the same time, like every time I've expected the worst in recent memory, they've not been the worst. So it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, it's exactly the opposite of IG. When you're expecting the best, they always pull the worst.
Yes, there you go. See, this is why it's like so hard to say that IG will beat RNG, right? This has to be the focus matchup, because RNG, you expect the worst and they do the best. From IG, you expect the best and they do the worst every time. It's
for
really
Korean lovers, it's Griffin against KT, exactly the same, I feel.
There you go. Not even that. It's like I would say it's closer because Samsung has more of a history. It's more like KSV or Samsung against KT, because it's
yes.
KSV has almost always failed playoffs, but then done really well in the regional, and then performed pretty well in Worlds the last 2 years. So yeah.
Right, being as we were talking about top laners and junglers, there was one anomaly I wanted to ask you about, like why the Chinese region does this. So people who watch the NALCS barely ever see Camille get banned. Now, it gets banned like reasonably decent amount in Korea, in Europe, but in the LPL, it's like the 4th most banned champion in the entire league. Why is that?
Camille is insane level 2 champ.
Yeah, that's true. But I actually feel like Trundle is bigger. Right now, Trundle is better in level 2. Right now. Not because of the matchup itself, but because the way of he guns bot lane. Like, about Camille, I have another point in China specifically, and that is that when you do the draft, you always point, okay, I can bring Trundle earlier, but they are not playing it in top lane, so you can flex it. But Camille, you can obviously flex it a lot. And at the same time, it's not only that you can flex the pick in the position, but you can also flex the style. Like, I have seen Camille play it a lot with Jarvan and Galio, and this, I call this the 4G style, because you are everywhere in the map. But at the same time, if you are playing Camille with something defensive, it also works well because it's like distraction. I remember that a lot when IG played with Kakao Rookie, not with Camille, but with other players, because they played around distraction a lot, like trying to confuse the enemy teams with different threats in teamfights. And Camille is perfect for that, because you have this hard engage, and you think, okay, they are going to pull the hard engage, but actually they are killing the tank, they are in the backline. That, I think IG pulled that off a lot of times. So Camille is more flexible in the sense that in draft and in style, you can flex it better than Trundle or Nocturne or all the picks. But I actually feel that if you want to play a specific style, Trundle is better. So that makes it, like, for drafts, it's normal that they are banning more Camille because it's more flexible. But inside of the game, I think Trundle is stronger.
I think it's interesting because since the Q nerfs to Camille a couple of patches ago, she's been played more and more in the top lane in the LPL. So I think that definitely in LPL, she's the top laner. I think if you look at NA, for example, they're not going to play as much Camille. Like, this is the biggest difference, I think, when people compare NA to LPL in terms of, like, oh, they're all just team fighting, is that LPL loves Camille, whereas if you talk about top lane Camille in NA, it's almost like a bad word, because obviously Camille can team fight, but the real use of Camille is that at 2 items, she wins so many side lane matchups, and like LPL teams are just better at executing that aspect of her. Like, I mean, Camille is kind of like the color black in the LPL, I feel like, where you can put her in any type of composition, you can wear her with anything. Like, she goes well in almost every situation. She goes well in casual events. She goes well like formal get-togethers. Camille is just like the everyday, everywhere champion. You can pick her early in the draft. You can pick her late. You can pick her as a counter pick. You can pick her as just something that, I mean, some people can even pick her support or mid or whatever, which we don't see nearly as that much in LPL, but it's like kind of always sort of there in the back of your head. So. And obviously, she combos super well in teamfights, and works super well in side lanes. Like, you mentioned the Galio, Zyra Khan stuff. Malphite, really good with Malphite, really good with any types of setup, and bam, type of like all-in composition. So
it also has another relation with wave management, because I have seen, like, as I explained before, Bilibili Gaming or Jingdong Gaming, they are really bad at setting the slow push and then execute it probably after the slow push, but they are really good at making fast pushes. And specifically Bilibili Gaming, Camille fits them so well because it's okay. It's like with Rumble in season 4 and season 3. I think it was in season 5, I'm not sure. But the thing about Rumble is that, okay, you fast push the side lane, and you go fast to the mid lane and you try to use the ultimate of Rumble. And it's the same with Camille. And about that, I feel like they are not doing that much, this kind of fast push in other regions. And Bilibili Gaming survives around that fast push because they can have Chieftain, even though Manhua is playing lately, but they can have Chieftain doing that, and they can have also Amazing J doing that. So it's okay. I am bad at wave management, but I can pull this fast push with this kind of a split pusher that is not actually the best against a split pusher, but it's actually against fast pushes. So I do the fast push, I gank mid lane, I take a fast burst kill, and then I go to Nashor. And I see that that's really strong, and Camille is one of the best champions in the game to do so.
Okay. Right, if we talk about Rogue Warriors, this is a team that, as I alluded to earlier, has Doinby on it, who actually has won the most Man of the Match games awards this split. So yet again, people doesn't have a hype around him at all, I notice, in the West still. And also, obviously, they have the infamous Mouse, who, again, if people have only seen international competitions, sadly, will be consigned to the trash can, even though he has always been a very competitive LPL player. And obviously, a player where, sadly, he never really got much hype in the West was SMLZ, who was being known for a long time. It was a rising talent, and then later on became one of the best AD carries, right? This is a squad which, again, has put together a strong regular season record, but we've yet to see them deliver in the playoffs properly. That was the problem, is they didn't make an impact on the playoffs last time around. So, Kelsey, whereabouts is this team at? Obviously, the record looks great, but is it going to be more of the same? Are they a different team this split?
So the interesting thing about Rogue Warrior is that in the past couple of series, they've actually made substitutions in top and jungle. They've put in Holder, who's a Korean top laner, who previously played for a Challenger Series team. Sorry, I'm not completely up on it, but he had some issues with his solo queue behavior, I believe. And now he was previously on ES Sharks, was the Korean team, and now he's going to be playing for Rogue Warrior. He became their sub and then started playing for them. And then you have Kiwi, who is a jungler, a Chinese jungler for Rogue Warrior. So previously they had, as you mentioned, Mouse and Flawless, yes, yeah. And a Korean jungler. So that they've kind of changed up the style. Where Kiwi is much more about creating and matching pressure, I think, but not necessarily the star in the same way that Flawless is, whereas like Holder gives them more dimension to style where they're winning early games. Like I think Kiwi's vision is really, really strong, like the way that he's setting up vision and coordinating with Kilwa to set up vision is really, really good. And that's something that's because like Kiwi is doing weird things in the last series where he's basically ending top lane when he knows the enemy jungler should be there, et cetera, et cetera. And then Holder is playing like the Camille that we mentioned, which is something that Mouse would sort of play and actually have games where he looked good legitimately, but not on the same level. And so this created a very different dynamic because I felt like Rogue Warrior wasn't necessarily winning early game unless it was through Doinby playing like a really specific mid lane counter pick. Yeah. Like he would play these weird tank setups. And I think this is part of why Doinby got so many man of the match points, not necessarily because he is the most insane mid laner, but because he would play these niche picks. No one else was playing mid. The team could accommodate these niche picks and he could make them look really, really good. So he immediately stands out as, okay, this guy should be the MVP because he makes this like weird stuff that seems really, really risky work. Like really low damage compositions. Like you said, the LPL doesn't play much Poppy, but Doinby played Poppy mid. Yeah. All these sorts of Kled mid. Like everyone, Doinby started the Kled mid hype train, but no one could make it work like Doinby made it work. Yeah. So I think that these types of reasons are why people are looking at Doinby and why Doinby seems so impressive. Plus his personality is hilarious and fans love him. He calls himself Super Carry Doinby and has a really big stream following, is really emotive on his stream. He speaks really, really fluent Mandarin Chinese, so that works for him.
It's really interesting. I mean, I love Rogue Warriors because of how many things you can talk about them. I'm about Doinby, to follow the same topic. I feel like I have nightmares when I'm thinking about Nautilus and Maokai in the mid lane back in the 2007, I think it was 2016 or 2015. No, it was with Xiao. It was 2015. And then I just, like lately, I just remember the Xiao versus LGD finals where Lulu was a priority pick. They were picking all the time. They was, okay, I swapped, you pick it, I pick it, you pick it, I pick it. And in the last game, I think they banned it or it was like out of the game. And Doinby played recently Lulu, and he played Lulu exactly the same way. I even watched the matches as he played Lulu in that final. And it's different of the way other players like Xiao Hu has played Lulu. And what makes it different, it really defines Doinby, because Doinby is the kind of distraction that makes you think, okay, he's the threat, but he's actually not the threat. The threat is SMLC. And when they put Holder and Kiwi in the game, like I don't know exactly if that's because they are not they are so in the first position because ADG collapsed. I don't know if that's a temporary thing or if they are picking them in playoffs. But if they actually picking them in playoffs, I feel that Holder is like a really nice addition because he doesn't play 19 games of Mundo in this regular season. Like Mouse has played the same like one match more than the matches that Europeans play in the whole season. So like Mouse is predictable in a sense, and that makes the addition of Holder really interesting. But to be honest, I think that they are if there's nothing else that I am not remembering or something that I have not read, they are going to put Mouse and Flawless just because of continuity and how Flawless plays in the team. Sorry. So about Doinby, about this Lulu thing, I want to continue it and just fast. Like another Lulu will protect SMLC and try to carry about that, like make a protect to ADC composition or some kind of, okay, as Ryze does, I flash W and you are killed in the jungler with early dives. But what Doinby does is actually globals. Like what Mouse and Rogue Warriors has done all the season is globals. Like they play this kind of having Gunplank in the top lane, having Nocturne or Taliyah in the jungle with Flawless, having Kled or Ryze with the ultimate or Galio, and they are everywhere in the map, and they try to focus on every single skirmish to have 5 members there. And they won so many matches because the enemy team was a bit ahead, and they just collapsed in the whole team fight. That happened to Invictus Gaming when they lost the match in the second match against them in their series, in the recent series. And then about Killua, about what Kelsey said about Killua and Kiwi and this kind of stuff, I have not focused a lot on that, but I've seen that Killua played a lot of protect, but engage at the same time, like Shen Rakan. And that fits so much this kind of globals, because, okay, with Shen, it's natural, you have the ultimate, but with Rakan, you can actually, like, go out so fast, and that fits so well the kind of style, okay, I pick someone, and then I am just one member more for Baron. And then I love how Rogue Warriors play around Nashors. They never 50-50. I have seen 2 times, I even counted them, but they always put this kind of ward system in the blue side jungle, in the red side jungle of the red side, that they go so deep and they don't catch enemies in the bushes. They actually catch enemies when they are trying to get mid priority. For example, imagine AG pushing with J-Kilov with Varus trying to farm the mid lane to have mid priority, and then Camille, Jarvan, Kled, Ryze, or whatever champions they have, jump inside of J-Kilov in the mid lane from Grades. That's really interesting. I have never seen a team do that. So I think that this style of World War is so unique that if they go to wars, for example, they will upset so many good teams because of that.
I think that in particular they will, like, that also is what makes them a bad matchup into RNG. Just because RNG always get prio and silence first and then mid. So you cannot catch them in mid very well. But I think just to really condense like why Holder is interesting for me is because the biggest problem with Rogue Warriors, they do not have a pressure point in the early game because SMLZ is not that type of player. SMLZ is probably the player we've talked about the most. We've just like talked about how SMLZ is a good AD carry, right? Mm-hmm. But he wants to be like the upset or the Sven. He wants to kind of scale and then like hard carry team fights, but he doesn't necessarily want to smash his lane or anything like this. And sometimes he does, but like Rogue Warrior just do not have a good pressure point for early game, and that's part of why I think they get so much out of Doinby's unique style, is because he kind of has to be that pressure point. And maybe he's not that useful in the late game, but he does that for his team when it's necessary. But if you have someone like Holder and someone like Kiwi, and you have this new duo, it makes Rogue Warrior a much more dynamic team with more options. And so I would like to see if they could pull that together for playoffs, because I think it would make them easier to bet on and easier to see advancing to Worlds. And I think this would be a really fun team to see internationally. So,
to sum it up, SMLC is the Reckless of Dazed, in a sense.
There you go.
Okay. So, obviously, I mean, you alluded to it there, FrVonLettow. Part of the problem is, in this conference, it's supposed to be EDG and then Rogue Warriors. They're supposed to be the teams battling each other as they were in the last split. But EDG has just become a black hole. Like, this has gone completely wrong. Now, this was a team where in the past it didn't matter which players they changed. They could always get to an elite level. They could always challenge for the LPL title. What's happened to EDG? What do you think's gone wrong?
Yeah, the first thing is that EDGs has not been dominant as they were previously in the previous years, like in this year, not only this season. And second, I really feel like, as I feel that RNG can come back in the playoffs, I don't see EDG coming back in the playoffs. Because the first thing that I see about EDG is like, they have this project, okay, I want to avoid clear love as much, I want to give Haro all the spring and then most of summer, and then they start slumping. They had 3 weeks when they lose continuously against, I think it was Rogue Warriors, I don't remember exactly the teams, but it was bad teams actually, except Rogue Warriors. I think it was LGD or something like that, oh my god. So,
they actually played a Jingdong, IG, and Rogue Warrior.
Then no, but there was a week or maybe 2 weeks when they lost against two bad teams exactly. So the thing about EDG is that if EDG was good right now, they will be perfect matchup against Rogue Warriors. But as EDG are bad, it's like the Group B has been so bad in the whole sense of the LPL because of that, because of EDG. And what I see about EDG, what they are bad at, is that first, Clearlove entered in the team and he's not playing this meta. Like, he's playing whatever, like he plays Rek'Sai. Every single team bans his Evelyn in 2018, like maybe from scrims or something, because he hasn't played it, I think, or maybe one match. But then he plays also Skarner. Like, obviously, it's getting back into meta in the sense, but it doesn't fit EDG styles, because EDG style is scaling and having proper teamfights later on with iBoy. And this kind of meta right now, and what the other good teams are playing, IG, RNG, Jingdong, it's all about prior mid, having a good pressure in early game and translating to other things, lanes. And Edward Gaming has no pressure. The only way that Edward Gaming has pressure in early game is because Scout is so good with Ryze. Like, if a Scout has no Ryze, like, you have won EDG. Like, most of the good teams right now, only banning Ryze will win against EDG, I think. And then, as I said, Clearlove is really experienced. He's such a historical player, but right now he's playing another meta. And then Rai, like, has decreased his level in this season. And that's really annoying in a sense, because there was this rumor that they were signing SIP from HQ. And it made sense, because in the sense that Rai is playing so bad. But I don't know how much of the fault is from him or from the way the team plays. Because he has failed so many times in 1v1s, in being behind in CS. But I actually feel like there's something more there. Because one player doesn't, from one season to the other, compared to really good to really bad. So I am scared about that. And then about Mako and iBoy, they are just playing the game. They are trying to play the game. I even saw one answer from iBoy. He was saying that right now he fails a lot, like he mispositions a lot, but Yakilov was mispositioned more, so it's fine. Like, because of Yakilov playing worse than me, that he's in a better team, it's fine that I misposition sometimes. That was a really, really strange argument, reasoning, sorry. And maybe that's because something is happening there, but obviously I will never know that, like, because I am not there.
And everybody's sense of humor is a little bit self-depreciating at times, so I think that was probably more of a joke than anything. But I do think that EDG is the biggest evidence that LPL has advanced in terms of macro play, because I feel like EDG are stuck in a time capsule from like 2015 still, where it's fine, we'll still be the Baron Nashor team, we'll still be able to like team fight with a really sick AD carry, and they will still beat you at bot lane at level 6. We'll still, like, even if we're playing a bad matchup, we'll still like outplay you in the bot lane skirmish. These types of focuses just really are not good. And even if it's weird, because I feel like having Nofe and the kinds of top laners that Nofe has worked with traditionally would really set EDG up to be a team that can fix their issue with not being very good at coaching or training top laners. But I feel like Ray is almost the biggest injustice of the EDG top lane system, because his first team was the EDG Edward Gaming Future team when he was playing in the qualifier for LSPL, and then he played with them in LSPL. And he basically said that he received kind of no direction at that time. And it was very clear from how this team played that it was like him doing his own thing, and then the rest of the team doing their own thing, and he just kind of pure damage Jarvan'd his way into like some sort of success, played a lot of Riven, and then he goes to Cloud9, has an okay time there, but obviously he had some personal issues like during his time in Cloud9 and everything else. Like he also played in another NA team where I felt like he didn't develop that well, but he was hitting some strides on Cloud9, and then he goes back to the EDG top lane system, and we see him not advance again. So I don't know if this is a Ray specific problem, or if it is just like EDG for whatever reason is a bad place for top laners to learn their craft.
Because isn't that the most puzzling part about this, is that obviously one thing that did change over the years is legendary coach Aaron transitioned out, and they brought in Nofe, obviously, of Rocks Tigers, one of the best teams of all time for any region, quite frankly. And you look at the talent that they have. Yes, the talent has changed, but in theory, this roster, if you just said at the beginning of a split, right, this is the roster I'm giving you, people would think, hey, this team should be at least like a top 4 team, you know, there's some pretty strong players here. So is it just a disconnect across the board? Have some players actually had slumps individually that's contribute to this?
Like we took the topic of Ray. If you see from a like outside perspective, you will say that Ray take a slump, and obviously Krillov take a slump, even though he came from the substitution of Haro. And like if you have topside slumping and your mid laner is really good, but he only shows his willingness to be excellent with Ryze, like it's not a slump. The word I will say is like you cannot reach further. Like EDG needs a change in the way they play, not in the players that they have. Because I see Mako this season has been like, I haven't seen something really good or really bad from him. But I've seen really good things. Like the most games that they played is because, okay, they play with Ryze, or Clearlove is cheesing with Qingzhao, like some kind of weird pathing. So he changed the way the enemy jungler looks at the game. Or Iboy carries in the late game with some kind of a sick team fight. But that's not the way you have to play the game, because you're depending on 3 different players in three different stances. So I think that, actually, no, I will not say that the whole players, like the whole squad of EDG is slumping. But I will say that the top side is slumping a bit, especially Krillov and Haro. And the bot side is too affected because of that. Like, because the bot side cannot do anything. If you don't have prior, you are not like a lane dominant bot lane. They have never been. Mako has never played with because Deft, he had some, like with Kalista, I think, some matches where he was lane dominant, but mostly Deft is not a lane dominant player. He's really good at the same things that Iboy is really good. So I don't think you should change the players. Like, you should change the way you play. And if you think that you should change the player because of that, well, that's another way of seeing it.
Okay.
It's interesting because there are a lot of comments to be made about this just from stuff that's happened. Like, Mako, apparently when Fire Lily came in, there was a big conflict between Fire Lily and Mako because Mako wanted Fire Lily to play like Clearlove. So it's almost like the style of EDG and the person who's kind of dictating it, the torch got passed from Clearlove to Mako, and Mako is still playing kind of the way he learned from Clearlove and from the former coaching staff, and he still dictates a lot of what's happening in game. And they follow a very similar pattern. And even in 2016, I wrote an article about like EDG and the lose to improve fallacy, because every time EDG would almost lose a major series after going like nearly undefeated in regular season, people would say, "Oh, they'll learn from losing," but they literally never have. I still have the same complaints about this team that I had then, and they have a bunch of different new players. I think Scout is a bit trapped in like 2015 rookie-itis, where he feels like he needs to make something happen in the mid lane, and so he overextends for that. And people call him the double-edged sword. Like even Aaron, a member of the coaching staff, calls him the double-edged sword because of how coin flip he is in terms of whether he will like super carry the game or just feed his ass off. So it's a really weird team, and I wouldn't know about how going about fixing it unless you just kind of blow the whole thing up and see what happens. But obviously they can still win games, even now with the way that they're playing. And so, I mean, they may as well. So
they can always say that at least they are not Team WE, you know. that's really slumping Team WE.
It'll be really interesting to see if this is the first Worlds where we don't have EDG, you know. So,
right. Just as EDG being terrible has been one of the revelations of the split, the other one on the other side of the equation is obviously Jingdong Gaming, who have gone from being just an also-ran team to one of the teams who are on the best records in the LPL, in one of the most competitive conferences, and most importantly of all, unlike every other team we've listed so far, where you're talking about the rotation and what it looks like with a different player, they only run the 5 players. And the players are not even players that Westerners are going to particularly know. Maybe people remember Loken, the AD carry from when he played for ESC Ever, and famously went through that like Kesper Cup or whatever it was when it was the off-season in Korea. Mm-hmm. Perhaps they remember Klid, the jungler, another Korean, when he was in Newbie/Chaogu Reapers. I doubt they do, to be fair, because it wasn't even like the prime of Chaogu Reapers that one ever remembers the King of Team fighting. Aside from that, these are essentially, to Westerners, unknown players. So how is this lineup with only 5 players, no subs, from an org that's not exactly known for any kind of like tenure of greatness? How is this team doing it? How are they one of the best teams in the LPL?
I mean, it's really hard to find Jingdong not entertained, like the entertaining team. Like Jingdong is the perfect example of an entertaining team, and it's the perfect example why people will call LPL the always fighting region. And I see Jingdong. It was interesting to me because I remember Kelsey tweeting that he wanted to see the Vitality against Rogue Warriors matchup, and I want to see this matchup, like Jingdong against Vitality, because Jingdong has, like in spring, he was playing mostly Galio, Jagao, and he switched, but he was the actual threat of Jagao for me was Zoe, even in spring, and now in summer it changed. Like he was playing mostly Zoe, but for me the actual threat is Galio, and that's because they always want to pull this Camille plus Galio thing and find fights everywhere and just fight, and not in the early game, because Loken never goes out in early game. Loken, when I said that Reckless was LCC, like Loken is also a bit of Reckless because he's the best KDA, he has the best stats, he always farms better than the enemy ADC, but he does nothing. Like he plays mostly as Real and Shaya, and he's always trying to, okay, I want to scale. And then the other part of the map, like Zoom, Click, Jagao, I always want to fight. Like they have this different, like Livmao protects Loken, and Zoom, Click, Jagao wants to fight all the time. And that makes so entertaining their games because it's so awkward. Like you cannot expect anything from Jingdong. Today they won both early games against IG. But to sum up, for me the biggest surprise was Zoom. Zoom won most lanes that I would have never expected he won. Like as I said previously, he was the only one killing 1-by-1 against Ledme. He won most lanes against like Flandre, all these older top laners that they're still playing, and he plays everything. Like he plays tanks, he plays Gunplank a lot. they love to pull the Camille, Camille, Galio, and the ultimate of Gunplank all the time. So it's like the way of punishing this way of playing is having more members in the map, because you know that Loken and Levau are going to arrive late to these 3 skirmishes, like 3-man skirmishes. And if you have, for example, I said previously that Rogue Warriors is a team that loves to do that. Like if they face in semifinals, which is quite probably, I see them losing so hard against Rogue Warriors because Rogue Warriors has more members when they are trying to fight. And this kind of play works so well against Team WE, ADG, Snake, all these teams that want to scale a bit, because they are getting out of scale because in bottom lane, Loken is out-scaling them, and they are getting punished because of wanting to out-scale because Zoom, Clit, and Zhao are making pickups all the time. So it's like a way of playing that works really well in the LPL, but I don't see them working well in an international or even in other regions, because it's so niche, the way they play. It's not chaotic. I will not say that it's chaotic, but I will say that it's so niche that it only works well in the LPL and with certain teams. The thing is that most of the teams are the majority. Oh my God, LGD, all these teams are having issues with these things. So they are like the perfect example of, I am not good, but you are so bad that I'm going to punish you all the time.
So Jingdong and Suning were really, really interesting teams to me, because Zoom and Yagao and then you had Xiaoao and Knight, and obviously Knight had some issues with, let's say, regulation and so he's no longer playing for that team. But those were the really exciting teams. And then on top of that, Jingdong and Suning are like the big online store teams, right? They're like the e-commerce rivalry, as they're called. And then they, like, every time these two teams face, like, both teams invite their employees to the stadium to root for them, and it ends up like being like a really big sort of thing. But then also, to me, these teams had the most exciting Chinese solo lane talent coming up from the LSPL that I had seen in a long time. So I was really excited to see these two teams. And then Zoom and Yagao ended up being the duo that excelled more, even though I kind of expected more from Xiaoao and Knight. So it was really interesting to see. And Yagao is someone who I think is really versatile, and he really should be someone that people, if you're interested in this region, are looking out for, like, future on, because I feel like we will see this guy one day on the international stage doing very, very well. And then Zoom is also like some guy who, he was on some of the worst teams in LSPL, like One U Dream, things like this, but he was always like, someone get this guy a good team. And we're seeing him perform in LPL, which is really exciting and really refreshing to see. Okay. In terms of what Jingdong in particular is good at, I would say like level 1, level 2 plans, like these types of, okay, the jungler is going to do this, and it's almost like, okay, it feels almost like Clid is kind of dictating this, and the laners just go along, and that's sort of how they end up finding success. And if Clid is playing like a jungler like Camille or maybe Lee Sin or something like this that can do something level 2 really strong, then they will almost always look for something to do level 2 and execute it well. And teams like that internationally just did very well this summer. And Jingdong has found wins off of that, but they've also managed to kind of carry that over a bit into the latter half of the split and work on some of their, just like kind of keep the momentum going to mid game, which I think a lot of teams have struggled with, and Jingdong have still managed to execute. So they're really fun to look at from there. They generally either lose really, really fast or win really, really fast. So you could tune into a Jingdong game and be like, yeah, this sucks. What the fuck are these guys talking about? This team is terrible. Or you could tune into a Jingdong game and just have a really good time and say like, man, I want to see this team just like duke it out on the international stage because it'll be fun. So
like what you said before about like you hope that people take note of Yagao and actually go and watch him as a player because they're going to enjoy watching him. To contrast that with the rookie narrative that I said didn't make it to the West. Like anyone who tunes into an IG game and thinks rookie's going to pick like fucking Zed and just go and solo kill the other, you're not going to see that, sadly. You're just going to see someone pick control/utility mages and just play really amazingly, but in the style that no one who wants to see people pop off in lane is going to enjoy. Whereas that all you need to know about Yagao is his top 3 most played champions this split are Zoe, Yasuo, and LeBlanc. So you might want to actually watch some of those games. Just look for a game where you get loads of kills. Watch that VOD. You might actually enjoy it, especially if you're an NA fan. Like I've never understood NA fans who talk shit on China. It's like, do I just have to take the VOD and put fucking Bjergsen over the nameplate and then suddenly you'd be able to enjoy it? Like, what is this shit? Like, that's what I never got. It never made any sense. Like, it's the same shit, except now, actually, they can fucking play macros. So, you're right now, it's nothing like your region. You wouldn't enjoy it. My mistake. So, and they actually know how to go off one by one into a side lane and not only kill minions, but kill a person if they come there, Kelsey. It's amazing, isn't it? Like, they're so far ahead of us. They're light years ahead at this point in time. Right, what about this, though? Can a team, I mean, the records suggest they can. Can this team actually go to Worlds?
I don't think so. Like, because the thing is, who do you replace for them to be above? Like, you have, most probably, if nothing goes wrong and RNG doesn't slump, even if they win against the DG and they lose against Invictus Gaming, they will have a chance of going directly being third. Sure. So RNG is there for sure. Invictus Gaming will be the next one because they reached like a good spot in spring and they will be to them. And then the winner of the split or the second of the split, and I don't see them winning against Rogue Warriors. If they pull that off, then maybe they are going to Worlds. But from the gauntlet, I don't think so. So they have to like focus so much on that series against Rogue Warriors after winning Sunning probably. That is too much effort. Like I don't see this team doing that proper planning because they are not a team of doing proper planning to an enemy team. They are probably a team doing proper planning for a cheese. But yeah, if they reach Worlds, they will be really, really funny to see. And it will be like IMA when they went in the group. I think it was against Flash Wolves that everyone was shitting them, and they won a game against Flash Wolves, and they made the group absolutely chaotic. I think it was SK Telecom, or no, but maybe SK Telecom, I'm not sure, but another Korean powerhouse there. So if they go to Worlds, they will make them so much interesting, but I don't think they can reach that because of how the gauntlet and the brackets of the LPL is right now. They are right now, sorry.
I think they have a better chance of making it if it ends up that they're going through the gauntlet. Like if RNG, like probably their best case scenario is IG wins and RNG plays third or something like this. And then they end up going through the gauntlet because Rogue Warriors is such a weird team. Like they're so weird, but at the same time, like you kind of know what to expect from them. And I would say that if they don't incorporate Holder and Kiwi by the time that they're in the gauntlet, that there is a chance that Jingdong could beat them. I feel like Rogue Warriors should be the team that goes because, I mean, if nothing else, like Doinby and SMLZ showing up internationally is pretty overdue at this point. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, they've both been to Rift Rivals and stuff like this at this point, but coming to like a proper world championship is something that I think both of these players have earned. And so I would rather see them make it. And I also think that this team like is more cohesive than Jingdong, which is still very chaotic in a lot of sense. So.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left before I have to do something else. But that 10 minutes is still a long time, as long as people don't just make a ridiculously long point. So I know one thing that we've addressed most of the playoff teams here. One thing that you wanted to talk about, Kelsey, was this upcoming change, which has been started to be implemented in the LPL. I noticed this hasn't actually gotten that much play in the West, that basically the LPL is going to be the first actual high-level geo-located league in esports. For anyone who doesn't know, I know that sounds like it should be the Overwatch League. But actually, the Overwatch League, I believe, said they weren't even going to do that until 2020. And in fact, recent news suggests that some of the owners are skeptical that can even be done. So obviously, this is all within one country, admittedly a fucking massive country. But even so, one country. And the idea is to tie the teams to cities. Now, where would you start with this, Kelsey? What made this an interesting topic, or what sparked your imagination on this one?
I think it's really interesting because you do have to dedicate time to travel. Obviously, you look at China on the map, and China looks kind of small, especially if you're coming from like the US, right? If you're coming from Europe, obviously China doesn't look that small.
Yeah.
But if you're coming from the US, China looks maybe sort of small, but you devote an insane chunk of time going from Beijing to Shanghai, which I would say are the biggest cities right now because RNG is based in RNG is based in Beijing. The main stage is based in Shanghai. There's going to be more teams based in Beijing as well. So if you're devoting time going between those cities alone, like you're going to be devoting like at least half a day probably to that kind of travel. And so that theoretically eats into potential practice time. It eats into potential reset time. It eats into potential days off. So I was curious if we think that this could have like large impact on LPL relative to the other regions. Do we think that it's something that is a net benefit, or like what kind of issue? Obviously, from a Western perspective, do we see this sort of issue having? So.
Is the premise that it would just be home and away games? So, for example, half the season RNG's at home, wherever that may be, and then the other half the season, so Beijing, as you said, on the other half the season, they're going to wherever the home ground is, the other person. Would it be like that?
It is like that a lot. Like we're having scheduling where matches start in a different location while matches in Shanghai are still going on. And the casters, like the English casters, if you watch the English language stream, are based in Shanghai. So they're casting the game happening somewhere else from the Shanghai studio, even if no one is in the Shanghai studio, right? So that's kind of where what's going on here is that we're already seeing like home and away games. You're already seeing teams making these sorts of trips like this year even, and actually RNG only got their home base in Beijing after MSI. So RNG were based in Shanghai during like the spring season, but they only recently moved to Beijing. So they have a brand new stadium, a brand new location in Beijing now. It's really cool if you find pictures of it, but obviously like this is new, and more teams will get home cities as time goes on. They'll add more teams to the LPL, and then we'll theoretically have, and a lot of this is because the Chinese government obviously wants to find more and more ways to provoke tourism to other cities, and so stuff like that.
What would you say then, FrVonLettow?
I have an interesting point about that because I just checked the distances actually, and I've seen that, for example, even in spring, Chengdu is the venue of, I'm not sure if it's Snake or oh my god, one of those.
It's OMG.
Hangzhou is one of the LGD, and they have this conference of West and East. So they only play once in the whole year. Not the whole year, in the whole season and in regular season. If they find in playoffs, they play more. And the thing is, they have to travel from one point to the other, and it's 2,000 kilometers away, which, as Kelsey said, maybe that's not a lot in the USA, but in Europe, I can go from where I am right now to Paris and even London. So I remember Europeans, players, claiming or complaining about having to go to the LCS in London in the 2014 or something like that because of the movement and this kind of super weeks. Super week is like a normal week in China, and like in the LPL, because they have so many matches. So if the calendar has in a way that you have to go to the Far and East all the time because it's in the middle of the season that you have to cross conferences and matches, there you have to travel so much. And if you have in the same week to travel so much, like I am not an expert on this, but I think it's the players are not focused at all. They are so dizzy from the fight, from the travel. So I feel that it arrived too early in a sense in China, even though obviously it's a good addition to the tourism and the feeling of being there. I love the videos that the Riot Games English channel did about cultural shock. But I feel like in terms of player, like if I were a player, like I will never approve that, because it's like you have to travel so much, and in the middle of the season when it's less important in a sense, like you are not starting, you don't have that motivation, and at the same time in the ending you are not fighting for playoffs. So it's in the moment of the season when you have the less of motivation and you have to travel around China. Like if I were a player, I would not like that, to be honest.
And I think last episode we talked to Peter about like the insane amount of staff. Like imagine their games every day. It's like Korea, their games every day except for Thursday. And so you have to have staff basically just to watch all of the games in your own region, let alone doing international research and stuff like this. So, and then plus like people to travel with the team, people to sort of stay home and keep up the base. And it just becomes an insane amount of time investment and resource investment to even have these. So I'm actually curious if it will impact performance because of how much extra resource like needs to be expended on having this type of geopolitical location, and the fact that it isn't reproduced in the West, isn't reproduced in Korea. You don't have as much of this like issue of traveling all the time, managing your schedule. Like, will it eat into the LPL performance in the long run if this is not replicated in other locations? And it doesn't sound like Riot does have plans to replicate this in other locations. I think it's a really interesting question and a really interesting thing to keep an eye on. So.
On the angle that you said about, like, obviously the government's push on this is, like, to try and make people go to the other cities, not just always being, like, Beijing or Shanghai only as the places they go. On that angle, I actually could see that being something that uniquely to China could work or could be a boon, because I know from, if you went to esports events in the 2000s or the early 2010s in China, they were almost never in Shanghai or Beijing for exactly that reason, where what would happen is, in the days where it would be a third-party tournament operator, and obviously the cost of the venue and that sort of thing is a massive one of your like margins, they actually would go to smaller places like Chengdu, Hangzhou. Like the first 2 times out in China was only to Hangzhou, which is basically fucking nowhere. Like it's not a glamorous place at all. And the whole reason why is because the third-party operator would either get the venue for free, or actually the local government might even actually like offset some of the costs in exchange for, like, you know, billing it as like, oh, this is going to increase tourism. Now back then that was definitely almost like the kind of like low-level corruption that you hear about in governments, where they just do things like this to like, because they have like a business arrangement with some guy. Because back then, obviously, holding some like Counter-Strike tournament in fucking Hangzhou didn't make any human being from outside of China go to Hangzhou. But I've noticed it generally actually sort of worked anyway, because bizarrely in these smaller places, even though, as I'm saying, there's no way the local crowd knew Counter-Strike, they would still turn up actually generally to watch the games, especially if there was a Chinese player. So that's the reason why actually, if it's all Chinese, it's the LPL, maybe it could work on that level. Like, I could see the logic. The problem is, and by the way, to contrast that to the West, where it wouldn't work, I think one of the biggest flaws that the Overwatch League has with trying to geolocate is that there's no way that the fucking any government official in New York is like, sure, let me build the stadium or pay part of it so you can have an Overwatch. No, they don't. Like, it's not on that level. They wouldn't give a flying fuck, nor would they imagine that it's going to help like tourism to New York or even a smaller place that needs tourism, you know, Minneapolis or something. I don't think they're going to buy into that logic. The other aspect, though, that I have a problem with, and this is the same problem I had with actually things like the Overwatch League saying they were going to do this, is it's already actually a fact, I don't know if you know this, in traditional American sports, that already, where they're all geolocated, everyone who isn't like the 4 big locations, LA, New York, whatever, Dallas, anyone who isn't in a big location already complains like a motherfucker 24/7. Like, this is unfair. Like, I've got a small, like, you know, I've got like, whatever it might, Milwaukee, like, how am I going to get all the fans here? How am I going to get the star player to want to come and live here? I'm in Vancouver, wherever it might be. You know, like, they already complain that their spot isn't worth as much. And for China, immediately, I could see that being an issue. I mean, if you ask a Westerner to name more than like 4 big places in China, I think they're going to have problems getting up to 4. Like, beyond that, what's going to happen to the 10th place team, to the 15th team? You're just getting a spot that fucking sucks. Like, no one wants to go there. That's one of the biggest issues I see with that. Like, it works well probably for like the 4th biggest city because they wouldn't get as much shine, but they could support it. But I don't know what you do if you're like the 11th. And if you say they're adding more teams, Lord only knows. I mean, I will say, obviously China with like Shenzhen has proven they can build up a city from nothing, but I don't know about like once you get about 10 deep, it's going to be getting a bit sketchy at that point in time. And you'll be in the middle of nowhere, some outskirts somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, and even like if they would have tournament events in cities that were not that small or not that like poor, like Suzhou or something, you knew covering this sort of event from years ago, like a couple of years ago, that it was probably going to have a ridiculous amount of technical related difficulties just because the internet infrastructure outside of the major cities was not necessarily as good. And I'm not saying that that's the case with like most of these locations, but some of them, it could definitely be a factor, you know? And also if you think about like the size of China, where the servers are located, you get someone out in a city like way out in the West and it's like, I have to play on a crap server because obviously China has multiple servers. It's like, I have to play on a crap server because my ping is so bad. If I play on the server where most of the other pros are playing, right? Or if I play on like the main big like Diamond 1+ server that is invite only. It affects
solo queue as well.
Yeah, so it could theoretically affect stuff like that. So I could see there being a lot of problems related to this. Obviously, we haven't heard a lot of complaints about this publicly, and we probably won't because of the way Chinese culture is. But
along those lines, good luck to whoever plays in a fucking city in the northwest of China and wants to get that good Korean solo queue playing. Like, you're going to have a fun time with the routing there, mate. It's going across an entire continent, under an ocean, and into Korea. Like, just good luck with that. God bless. Like, I don't think you're going to make it. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Cesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.